Hi, everybody. This is Patti Negri. Welcome to the Witching Hour, that hour of the day when magic happens and the veil is thin. Whenever you happen to be tuning into this podcast, the magic of this podcast is in my amazing guests. Magical, educated, experienced, the best of the best. And today I am really excited about this one. We are just getting to meet her all together. But let me tell you a little bit about Megan Rose, PhD. She has a doctorate in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and a master's degree in religion and society from the Graduate Theological Union. That's a lot of words. She's initiated ceremonial magician, a Shakta Tantric practitioner, and a senior seer in the House of Brig Fairy Seership Institute. She serves as an ordained interfaith minister and psycho-spiritual counselor, and is the executive director of the Entheosis Institute, which I probably messed up that name, so you can fix it. Hi, Dr. Megan. How are you?
Great. How are you? It's wonderful to be here.
Yes, it's so good to have you here. We've waited for a while. Good things come to those who wait. That's what I always say. But thank you so you have a book. You have a book that I don't have yet, but I definitely want to talk about it. Spirit marriage, intimate relationships with other worldly beings. So we're going to start off right there. What is spirit marriage?
Yeah. Great question. I like to unpack both the term spirit and the term marriage when people ask me that, because, they're sort of the biggest, broadest, most general terms that we understand, sort of, when we talk about spirit, that we're talking about something that isn't in a physical human body at this time. But it's really a broad term that can include deities and angels and beloved dead and fairy and ancestors, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. So it's generally otherworldly beings that aren't currently in a physical human incarnation. And I get specific like that because, as we'll probably talk about, when I did this research, I discovered that there are people that are in spirit marriages with, say, for example, an earth spirit that will manifest through a tree. And so to say that it's, everything that's disincarnate isn't actually accurate, because, when you have a being that you're working with that manifests through something, it is a physical something that you're in a relationship with. It's just not necessarily of this dimension, this plane. And then marriage, right, is a term that most people understand, that being married is a bonded, committed relationship with someone. And that there is usually some sort of vows or ceremony or something that you sign on the dotted line around. And so that's the term that I've chosen, although there are other words and terms that people use, like indwelling and merge, and a kind of like God's spouse is a term that's used frequently for this. And I sort of gravitated towards the term marriage because my research specifically is not just about humans that have generalized intimate relationships, what's sometimes called spiritual intimacy with spirits, but who have really stepped into a devotional, committed relationship, some kind of ritual or ceremony. But just like human marriage can look a lot of different ways, right? And throughout history, human marriage has looked a lot and has been entered into for a variety of different reasons, not all for romance, sometimes for contracts or things that you want to do together or whatever. So spirit marriage is similarly not necessarily just about being in a romantic relationship or a erotic relationship with a spirit, but sometimes people enter into these marriages for maybe more practical purposes or for different motivations. And certainly the research that I gathered over the years of writing the book, which was originally my PhD dissertation that then became this book, was, upheld that idea that there's a variety of ways that people enter into these relationships and motivations for that.
So, and this is something that's kind of been around historically and through religion and belief systems forever, right?
Kind of. I mean, The first recorded accounts that I could find were in ancient Mesopotamia and the Sumerian sacred marriage ritual, where the priests and the priestesses of the goddess Ishtar Inanna would marry her and then be in devotional service to her, and serve as her temple keepers and her mediators to, to the public. And so I suspect, and I think that my research really upholds, that this practice of stepping into a devotional bonded relationship with a spirit being is really what has underpinned a lot of our evolution as a species. That's my personal theory. I think the research really upholds it, and certainly many of my co-researchers that I interviewed had that perspective as well. And so you could argue that this has been with us since the beginning of humanity, right? It's one of the things, if you look at the Genesis account in the Bible, they talk about the sons of God, the angels, coming down and marrying or taking of them wives. The text reads, it's Genesis 6, where they talk about, or maybe it was Genesis 2. In any event, they talk about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and giving birth to these hybrid giant Nephilim type beings that sometimes did great works and sometimes got up to mischief, but depending on who you talk to and how they orient around that, it's one of the theories of where the sort of witch blood or the wonder working magical capacity
Yeah.
of humanity came from, is that sort of intermingling of human and other. And certainly the folkloric stories that I've collected, the mythological stories, even a lot of the anthropological and historical accounts, as well as the contemporary stories, uphold that idea that these kinds of relationships, stepping into a bonded, intimate relationship, really activates, quickens, and accelerates us as human beings, as individuals.
That is beautiful. And I use the term witch blood, and I actually even use that same story, half human, half not human, otherworldly. People who don't like our witchy world, I've heard them call it angel blood. Okay, that's fine. Same, words are words are words. So how would it, so we understand the benefit. How would it benefit somebody to go, okay, I'm going to marry an other world, besides maybe it's really fun and maybe your evolution as a human? How is it benefit to marry somebody who doesn't have a body, perhaps?
Well, I mean, let me just first say that spirit marriage is the way I sort of orient around it is more of an advanced practice, right? So we have mediumship and channeling and spirit possession and spirit communication. And there's this sort of like spectrum of ways in which we interact with the other world. And many, many folks spend their whole life just working in that milieu, right? They have a devotional deity or they have a guide and they work with them and they do wonderful things. I mean, tutelary spirits and familiar spirits are fairly widely understood concept in the occult and in witchcraft. The spirit marriage usually, and again, we're talking about this very specific bonded, ritualized practice that is happening. It's usually at the behest or the request of the spirit. So that is sort of one of this kind of, I won't say it's the only telltale sign of authenticity, but it often, when I interviewed folks, because I went around and interviewed about 9 different practitioners, contemporary practitioners of spirit marriage, that was one of the things that that people told me again and again. They didn't seek this relationship out. This relationship came to them either because the spirit presented and said, "I want to marry you," or what is sort of a telltale sign of an authentic contact is the spirit went to one of their mentors and said, or an elder in their community and said, "I want to marry so and so." And then the request was brought to the person, and the ritual often sort of followed from that. So, and that's not to say that people can't pursue right? A bonded relationship with a spirit. It's just that, I want people to really understand that this isn't something that you just rush into willy nilly because you've got a crush on some deity and you want to, you know, there are practices for stepping into more deeply loving, devoted, maybe even erotic relationships with deities. But the marriage is something that, just like a human marriage, you would hopefully not rush into it and you wouldn't take it lightly.
Interesting. Yeah, because I don't, again, this is a new area for me. What area I did a movie several years ago now. I think they played it once on trial. It's called Ghostly Lovers, and it was about spectrophilia, the term spectrophilia, which is human, other entity, ghost. They made it very much like a Hallmark movie, really. These different stories of women, all women, I think, that had with one was her ex-husband, which was beautiful. And in all honesty, that happened to my best friend after her husband died young of cancer. It was closure. It was this beautiful thing. And one was kind of a fantasy thing, and I forget the other one. But what this again is feel just very, very ritualistic and beautiful. So again, so you're somebody in one of your mentors has told you to do it, your guide, you make that choice to do it. So what is the living human person getting out, and what is the deity or spirit or whatever like that?
Mm-hmm.
You can't bring them home to mom.
Right. R.J. Stewart puts it this way. R.J. Stewart's a Scottish fairy seer, and he's the mentor of my mentor, Orion Foxwood, or a mentor, I should say. RJ says that they do things that we can't do, but we do things that they can't do. And so we're talking about stepping into a co-creative relationship. And the reason that I like the term marriage again is we have this understanding of a marriage as two people coming together and creating a new third thing, which is the relationship. And sometimes that relationship manifests in physical children and offspring. Sometimes it is a partnership that has things that you do together and explore together and co-create together. But the spirit marriage is very much something that becomes a cauldron or a creative space for something to arise from. And so the folks that I interviewed, myself included, I included my own story in my book, is really about how these relationships formed and shaped and then gave rise to usually some sort of co-creative project out into the world. So, for example, I interviewed Orion Foxwood, who I just mentioned, and his entire school, the House of Bree Fairy Seership Institute, arose from his fairy marriage to Bree. And that marriage brought through just this tremendously powerful teaching system that is now has hundreds and hundreds of students all over the world. In the tantric tradition, so I interviewed a Shakta tantric practitioner who's married to the goddess Kali. And her marriage to Kali really precipitated her becoming a guru and a teacher of that lineage publicly. So before that, she had been training and receiving the initiations from her guru and her lineage family. But it was really after the marriage that she was able to take that public and out into the world. And on and on and on. I interviewed New Orleans and Haitian Vodou Mambos, and their marriages is what facilitated or supported their ministry out into the world to their community. So oftentimes, and I won't say that this is the only outcome of the spirit marriage, but oftentimes it is you're called into this because you have some sort of co-creative project that you are bringing out into the world that's not just for you, but for your community. And certainly that was the result of my own spirit marriage, which this lovely book out into the world for other folks to learn about this phenomena and read about it. And my book is sort of what I hope my book is a first pass conversation on this topic. Like I said, I looked at it historically and anthropologically. And I interviewed 9 different practitioners, but it is by no means the end all final discussion on this. I'm constantly finding and hearing about new traditions that I didn't know about before, because this is a widespread phenomena. I mean, every continent, almost every culture has either um, cosmological tales or mythological tales or active practices that bring people into this type of co-creative relationship.
That's fascinating. Okay, so if you're coming together and probably usually often for a bigger project, something you bring to the world, and so you're having this like two become one, like what a marriage sort of is. So how is that? Would that be different than say you're just channeling another spirit or a possession of a spirit, which
Yes.
people do?
Yeah, spirit and channeling. I mean, there's some fine distinctions here, and some people understand possession and channeling in different ways. But as I experience, and I've experienced all of these different things: possession, channeling, mediumship, and spirit marriage. The possessory mediumship is something that, like, you're either in conversation with, or it comes in and then it leaves. Yeah.
Mhm.
The spirit marriage, the idea of the marriage is that there's a union. The way Orion describes it beautifully, Orion says, "When I close my eyes, I see into Bree, my fairy wife's world. And when I open my eyes, she sees into mine." So there's a kind of, he calls it a symbiosis, right? There's a merging, a mingling that has happened between the two consciousnesses, so that it's not about reaching very far, if at all, to the spouse. There is this cohabitation where your consciousness is sort of permanently altered by the presence of this being. But it is, lest we start worrying about, being controlled, right? Or giving over your agency or sovereignty. Um, we start with this understanding that we bring a lot to the table, because, like RJ said, we do things that they can't do. And so part of the process of heading into this kind of committed relationship is the discernment and the agreement setting and the boundary setting. And there are times where, and Orion described this beautifully in his interview, where he talks about how Bree will recede from his consciousness and be in her fairy world and doing things that he doesn't really need to be a part of, just like he will recede from her and be in his human world and do things that she doesn't need to be a part of. But all he has to do really is shift his breath, shift his vision slightly, and she's there and she's with him. And I think that the primary difference between that kind of familiar spirit or guide, the marriage version of that, versus just having a guiding presence that's always with you, is kind of how you grok it. It's kind of how you orient towards it, what the agreement of the relationship is, and what the nature is. It doesn't mean that our familiar spirits and our guides aren't loving, but the intimacy of that is a slightly different flavor. It's like having your best friend versus having your spouse. You're
Right.
still opening and sharing certain parts of yourself, and there's certain levels of intimacy, although it might not be a physical intimacy with a best friend. But that all looks very blurry and not as finely defined in nice, neat little boxes when we start thinking about polyamorous relationships and people who, like myself, I was married for a number of years, and my partner, my ex-husband, and I decided that we were going to divorce, but he's still one of my best friends. So there's a level of intimacy there that is different than, just sort of a regular friend, or different from my current partner who I live with. So lots of, and polyamory, I should also just, one little thing, polyamory is kind of the rule amongst spirit marriage, because many of the people that I interviewed had human partners that they were in a bonded marriage type or spousal relationship with, and they were married in the spirit realm. And sometimes they were married in the spirit realm to more than one spirit.
Wow. So you would call that polyamorous, because I know Orion has a husband. He has a human husband. And so it's not like they're asking for monogamy or anything like that. You should have so who gets, and I guess somebody's going, wow, this sounds good. Who gets to have a spirit husband, or who should have, or wife or partner or whatever?
That's a great question. I think that, not everybody's necessarily going to get a spirit that's ringing their doorbell saying, I want to marry you. That was my experience. That's what led me into this research in the first place, is that I had this spirit that was like, marry me, marry me, marry me. And this is 20 years ago. And I was like, I have no idea what that even means. But it was great because it sort of forced me into doing this research and really looking at what is this practice of marrying spirits. But not everybody has that experience, and that's fine. We all have spirits that we maybe feel a really strong affinity towards, and each of us have a divine self, right? We each of us have that part of us that is divine, that is nested within a divine, that we're a flavor or an expression of the divine in the embodied realm. And we can all get to know that part of ourself that is divine and step into a deeply bonded, devotional, and sometimes committed relationship with that divine self. What's interesting is, depending on the tradition that you talk to, some will say, well, you can't marry your divine self because it's a part of you and it would be weird to marry yourself. But the Shakta Tantric that I interviewed that's married to Kali is her divine self, and Kali is her spirit wife. So in that tradition, they call it the Ishta Devi, the chosen deity. And she's, started out in this Ishta Devi relationship and then married her. So, I really don't like to make hard and fast, like, oh, this can't happen, this can't happen. I say that, when we are starting to talk about non-ordinary, non-local beings that are not bound by time, space, things get much more fluid.
I love it. Well, just like life on this side of the plane too. So what are some of the, like, if somebody's going, this may be interesting, maybe there's going to knock on my, what are some of the precautions? Are there any dangers to this, or things that can mess you up into this world kind of thing? Or?
Well, I think that's why I really encourage people to start with the divine self. We first I would recommend, and there are people that are more transgressive practitioners and they will work with all sorts of spirits, but I recommend that you start developing a devotional relationship with a spirit or a deity or a being that like, and trust, that you feel is benevolent, that has your best interests in mind, and that that respects your boundaries, and that demonstrates to you their worthiness, right, of the relationship. Because it's not just about, oh, Holy Spirits, it's not just about supplication. It is about really understanding that you bring something to the table. Starting with the devotional aspect, and then that really quickly moves into the discernment practice. And that is really being able to discern your spirits, really being able to have the rituals, the tools, the practices that help you understand, am I talking with a spirit, or is this some inner aspect of myself that is longing for something, which are all valid desires and hopes. But we really want to get good about our discernment tools like divination, so that we can sort of discern what is a desired spirit contact, what is my own inner aspect, what is maybe an ancestor that's coming forward to get healing. And then the third practice is just discipline. I call them the 3Ds: devotion, discernment, and discipline. And discipline is really about showing up and doing the work, because you can't develop a relationship with someone you don't spend time with. And just like a human partner, you have to spend time getting to know them, getting to know their voice, their touch, their presence, trusting them, doing things that you are trustworthy, and developing through disciplined action that bond.
Okay, speaking of touch, So your picture, what about intimacy and sexual? Like your picture is pretty sexy on the cover of your book. And my friend, it wasn't deity, it was her deceased husband that she had. And from what I hear, it's sexually intimacy. It's really great as far as just sex itself goes. So is that how big of a part of that is in most cases? How much of it is just like the sex part?
It really depends. It depends on the spirit that you're working with, on the your needs and desires, and what you want out of the relationship. Um, some of the folks that I talked to, eroticism was a part of their spirit marriage, and others it wasn't at all. And I think just like human marriage, right? Human marriages, sometimes people have highly sexual marriages and some people don't. Um, and so the the cultivation of spectrosexuality or spiritu intimacy, those sexological practices of arousal and eroticism, can certainly be brought into the dynamic, or be what is a precipitating factor for the relationship. For myself, I when these sort of spirit lover dreams where my contact would come to me and they would be these very erotic dreams, which were lovely and grand. And then at some point, marriage proposal happened, and then I was like, "Well, what's going on here?" And really wanted to learn more about it. But it became really obvious that for me, at least in the nature of my relationship, that it wasn't just about having an erotic spirit contact; that there was something deeper. It's often, like it is with a human partner, right? There can be something much more deeper and profound. And what I will say, and my interviewees, Caroline Kenner, talks about this, that eroticism with the other world is sort of less about pleasure for the human and more about activation and quickening. There is a kind of healing and awakening that can happen in the human that is specifically transmitted through erotic encounters. And I won't say that that's true for everyone who's having these kind of encounters, but it is certainly a side effect of the spiritual intimacy that I have seen evidenced again and again and again in the stories and the reports and the interviews. That, and it was certainly a byproduct of my own experience as well.
I love that. And again, my experience, which is very different than yours in the work that I've done and the people I've worked with, I love that you're doing this. I love you have this book because it has been around and people have it, whether they're called in by a deity or it's their ex-husband or it's just some spirit lover that comes in. In our modern Western prudish society, people sit at home going, I'm crazy, or it's evil or something like that. So you use the term actually normalizing the paranormal, which so what does that mean? Because this has to be talked about.
Yeah, well, normalizing the paranormal is really just about understanding that what we call paranormal um, or extraordinary is really just sort of an expansion of our five senses, right? So often in witchy circles, we talk about the sixth sense and the extra sensory perception and things like that, clairvoyance, clairaudience, whatnot, and that work of the witch, right? And the magical practitioners to cultivate and develop those extra senses. And paranormal circles have spent lots and lots of time and energy trying to demonstrably measure. In fact, Dr. Dean Radin's book, Magic, I think is a excellent is an excellent example of some great paranormal research that he's been documenting on EA. But in any event, it's really just mostly the westernized culture that thinks that these sort of extra senses are weird or beyond the norm. If you step outside of the colonialist framework to other religions, other cultures, other traditions, this is just part of being human. It's just sort of part of our expanded ways of knowing and perceiving the world. And so, I really want to invite more discourse and more normalization of these ways of knowing and being in the world, um, so that people understand that, first of all, these things are possible, and second of all, we're not pathologizing them. I'm a psychologist, and I am really kind of on a little bit of a crusade to depathologize these extraordinary ways of being and knowing, and really have a much broader perspective of um, what it means to be a highly sensitive person, what it means to be intuitive, what it means to have extraordinary capabilities.
Thank you for doing that for all of us, especially in this day and age. Okay, we don't have much time, but I have one more question for you, and I'm probably even going to say it wrong. What is entheosis?
Yeah, entheosis is perfect. You pronounced it perfectly.
Ah!
Yay! So entheosis, the word theos is divine, and entheos is the divine within. So it's this idea, going back to what we were talking about with the divine self, that we each have a divine self that is inside of us, that can be awakened, right? It's not this idea of God, goddess, divine being out there so much as it's already here. The entelechy, the seed of that is already inside of you. And we can, if you think of it like a little coal, we can blow on that and it can get brighter and brighter and brighter until that part of us sort of lights us up like the sun, right? In the mystery traditions and in the ceremonial magic traditions, they call it the sun of the self, and it sort of lights us up and infuses us with that grace, with that benevolence, with that ability to be a blessing, right, for ourselves, for each other, for the planet.
That is beautiful. And so again, relating it, how does that relate to spirit marriage itself? Is that part of it?
I talk about it in the book. I talk about how, originally I was like, is this practice of knowing the divine self a kind of spirit marriage? Because you're stepping into a bonded, committed relationship. And I interviewed a ceremonial magician who had gone through the Abramelin operation of knowledge and conversation with his holy guardian angel. And we talked about it. And I was like, feel like this is a kind of marriage. And he's like, well, it's not actually inaccurate to think of it as a marriage, but we have so many prejudices or ideas about what marriage is that he goes, I just shy away from that term. But, we are talking about stepping into a bonded devotional relationship with something that is you, but not you. It's more than you. And in fact, I like to think of it as you are an expression of it, right? I describe it as like you're the fingertip of the divine, and the consciousness, the intelligence of the divine is so much bigger than you are, but you get to be an expression of it out into the world. And there might be somebody else who's expressing that same divine qualities in their own unique way, but you move far enough back up the stream and you're all nested within this divine consciousness. And then there's another divinity over there that somebody's expressing, because they all have different flavors, right? Whether it's a flavor of love or justice or the underworld or wisdom, right? There's all different kinds of flavors. And in the work of entheosis, we understand that we may be here to express that one flavor for our whole lives, or we may dance with a flavor for a while and then have another flavor come forward. So in, some of the entheotic practices that I researched, the divine self can change, right? Your devotional relationship can change as you grow and change as an individual.
Wow, that 1,000 questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time. I can't wait to get the book, you guys. So to everybody's who's listening now going, oh, this sounds good. So tell people where they can find you, where they can find your book, Any social media, because I know that everybody's up as riled up as I am right now.
Well, the book is available pretty much online on all major booksellers, and it's in some bookstores as well. And they can find me at drmeganrose.com, which is my website. And also on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Dr. Megan Rose. And then I also have a spiritmarriage.com website where I have some more information about the book, some of the resources for the book, references, I should say. And then also if people are having spirit marriage encounters, or if they know of accounts that maybe weren't included in the book that they think, would be good to have as part of this encyclopedia on spirit marriage that I'm constantly collecting for, you can go to the Spirit Marriage website and submit your story or submit your account.
That is beautiful. And again, thank you for doing this. So everybody, Dr. Megan Rose, drmeganrose.com and spiritmarriage.com. So thank you for bringing your magic to the Witching Hour. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
You're the best.